belatedly, for some of you, welcome to Bloomberg. It's very nice to be here with all of you. It's been lonely. It's been quite a while. Those of you who don't know me, I'm Matt Winkler, and been at Bloomberg now 33 years. And I've been with ICFJ as a board member. It's going to be my 20th year, so this is an opportune time, and it's great to be with all of you again, because this has been a place where we have had many illuminating evenings for ICFJ over the past 20 years, and so I'm glad we're all back here. You get some idea that I'm a supporter of ICFJ, so there's a real good reason for that, and somehow with ICFJ, the best is always yet to come, and people who are with ICFJ continue to give and keep giving, and it's a wonderful, virtuous circle. And I wanted to share with you just a little bit of some history. ICFJ has a new fearless leader in Sharon Moshavi, and what you don't know is that she before she took over ICFJ, and for many years before that, has been responsible for the successful programs that ICFJ has sponsored and continues to. She was a fearless journalist, and in fact, she was, from 1994 to 1998, ubiquitous on Bloomberg, and was, in fact, responsible for 478 bylines, which you can look up on the Bloomberg terminal. And by the way, to understand, the significance of that, back in the 90s, when people really didn't understand India, Sharon Moshavi was writing about the stock market in India with great authority. But of course, her curiosity is unlimited, so she did many stories, and not just for Bloomberg, by the way. Along the way, there was this editor at Bloomberg, I said Bloomberg, at Business Week, because it wasn't part of Bloomberg then, Joyce Barnathan, and she would write for Business Week prolifically. And you may know that in 2009, Bloomberg and Business Week came together, and now there's Bloomberg Business Week. So you can see all of this wonderful work together forever. And, some of these stories, by the way, I should just tell you, are amazing, like working women lift the economy as loans start to flow more freely. And she wrote this in 1998, sort of a prophetic piece. Here was one, desert nukes, spies, and a high-tech oasis. And that was about this place in Dimona, Israel, where all kinds of interesting things happen. She did one, Indians tell KFC, take that Colonel guy and go home. And enough of that. So that was the early years. All kidding aside, I'm just thrilled to be here. And in 2006, 2007, when I was on the board, had the opportunity to be a part of something that is now in its 15th year, and that's a business journalism program, and of all places, Beijing, the Tsinghua journalism program at Tsinghua University, and it was something that was created literally by ICFJ. We all came together, and it is a groundbreaking program that has produced 450 master's degrees in business journalism to Chinese and international students. How we managed to see this thing survive and prosper given everything that's going on today is just amazing, but it's there. And, that program fits very nicely into our own outlook at Bloomberg, but more importantly, it very much is the epitome of what ICFJ is all about, that there really isn't any place in the world that ICFJ doesn't touch and illuminate. And really, that's why we're here tonight. So without further ado, thank you for all coming. I want to now welcome our Master of Ceremonies for this evening, Yamiche Alcindor, Washington correspondent for NBC News and host of the PBS NewsHour Washington Week. Thank you very much.
So good evening, everyone. I almost wanted to pet people when I came in because I'm so not used to seeing people in person anymore. So I'm so excited to be here in person and living after this pandemic. So thank you so much, Matt, for that introduction. I'm honored to be the MC tonight. Carrie Budoff-Brown, who works at NBC with me, and or I should say works with me, but really she is my boss, and my great colleague. So she invited me to do this, and I am honored and happy to be here. So thank you so much. I very much, of course, admire the work of ICFJ, and I want to encourage all of you to be tweeting. You should be using the hashtag ICFJLive. It's up there. So I very much, of course, really admire the work of this organization. As a Haitian American woman, I have done work in Haiti and the Dominican Republic and all sorts of places where journalism can be dangerous and can be a place and can be a craft that really is putting your life on the line. So I simply know that supporting journalists in places where simply reporting the truth can mean harassment or jail or even murder is really, I think, an honorable goal and an honorable mission. Supporting journalists, of course, in difficult situations is what this organization does every single day. Later tonight, we'll have a whole panel where we can talk about what's going on in Russia, Afghanistan, and of course, what's going on in the United States, because now we, of course, have to be part of that conversation about democracy, about sort of credibility in elections and journalism. We're going to have a whole host of journalists from places like Afghanistan and Brazil and the Czech Republic and Russia, all places where journalism is under siege, and all places where these journalists can tell us a bit about sort of how we're navigating what's going on in America as well. In addition to the panel discussion, we're also going to be announcing the winners, the 2022 winners of this organization's Knight International Journalism Awards and the Innovation in International Reporting Award. These awards honor outstanding journalists or media leaders who, despite difficult circumstances, produce pioneering news reports or innovations that make an important impact. The awards will be presented at ICFJ's Tribute to Journalists 2022 in November. On November 10th, hopefully, of course, we'll be gathering again in person, which sounds like an amazing thing to think about in the fall. And I know we're all in some ways very relieved that we're not eating leftovers on Zoom and wishing we were out. So I'm very excited that we can be here together. So definitely excited to be here tonight, and also November 10th in Washington, D.C. And of course, as previously announced, my amazing colleague, I have to say the Andrea Mitchell, because I can't just say Andrea Mitchell, because she is the Andrea Mitchell. She's the Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent and the Chief Washington Correspondent for NBC News. She will receive the 2022 Founders Award for Excellence in Journalism that same evening. We'll hope you attend this important event. Again, save the date, November 10th, and stay tuned for an invitation. And now I want to turn the podium over to ICFJ's president, Sharon Moshavi, to tell us more about what this organization does to help journalists in these chilling times. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Yamiche, very much. We are so thrilled that you agreed to be our MC tonight and that Carrie convinced you to do it. So thank you so much. And of course, an enormous thank you to Matt Winkler and to Bloomberg for hosting us in this wonderful space. And Matt, thank you for the rundown of my early career. I should have known that there would be data involved. I had no idea I had that many bylines at Bloomberg. So there you go. Anyway, I echo Yamiche. I am thrilled to be doing this in person. I think not not being in front of a Zoom screen is a thrill of its own. So wonderful to see you all here in person, and thank you so much. So I want to talk a little bit about our motto, and ICFJ's motto is, "It takes a journalist." And it takes a journalist to uncover corruption and hold a government to account. And it takes a journalist to combat a barrage of disinformation on everything from the pandemic to elections. It also takes a journalist to amplify the voices of those who too often go unheard. And in ICFJ's case, it actually takes 132,000 journalists. That's how many we count in our global network in the last 5 years alone. And here's a few ways that we are supporting them. When Russia invaded Ukraine, we jumped into action, helping independent journalists in both countries and in the region provide critical information. A few examples are Joyce Barnathan Emergency Fund for Journalists, named for my amazing predecessor as president, is ensuring that Ukrainian journalists in our network can report safely and keep their media organizations afloat. The fund is also supporting independent Russian journalists who've been forced into exile. Through our Pamela Howard Forum on Global Crisis Reporting, named for our wonderful vice chair, who is with us tonight. Pam, where are you? You're here somewhere, I know. There she is. We are providing grants of up to $10,000. That's for journalists in Ukraine, in Russia, and in neighboring countries who are covering the war and its broad ramifications, everything we can see from the refugee crisis to the economic fallout. We've received 117 applications for support, clear evidence that the need is great. Our International Journalists Network is the go-to site for journalists to improve their careers and improve their work. And we are providing many more resources in Russia now, and that's one of the site's 8 languages. And finally, we're teaming with a company called Siphon, which is a censorship circumvention platform to help exiled independent Russian media outlets reach audiences inside their country. So when Russians use this platform to access blocked websites like Facebook, they get this landing page that you can see there with stories they normally would never see. And this is really an important counterpoint to Putin's propaganda. And of course, even as we redouble our efforts to help those covering this incredibly brutal war, we are supporting journalists from Mexico to Kenya, Lebanon to Philippines, and here in the US. And we're really helping them as well to learn from one another and support one another. We know that the best journalism in the world is going to wither and die if media organizations cannot support themselves. And so that's why we launched an effort called Elevate, which is a global effort to provide independent media entrepreneurs with the skills and resources to succeed financially. We selected 18 dynamic small and medium-sized outlets from countries as varied as Venezuela, Nigeria, Egypt, and Pakistan to receive the help they need to continue to do their work. We also know that news media need to constantly innovate to find solutions to the problems that plague us. And so we are about to launch LEAP, a news innovation lab. It's going to seek out the most cutting-edge ideas from around the world, ideas to combat disinformation, to build new products, to build audience trust. And we're really excited about that. That will be a space to experiment, to try new things, and we hope will help lay a path for the news media of the future. So stay tuned for more on that. And now on to the news of this year's awards. As Yamiche told you, we have previously announced that the relentless and incisive Andrea Mitchell will receive our top award, and we're really thrilled about that. And I'm also thrilled to tell you that our Innovation in International Reporting Award, to be given in November, will go to Christo Groyev and his media outlet Bellingcat. And Christo has done, feel free to applaud, has done more than, I think, pretty much anyone to really expose the deadly lies flowing out of the Kremlin. Bellingcat is a global investigative journalism group. They specialize in using open source intelligence and networks of journalists and citizens to expose the truth about war, human rights abuses, and the criminal underworld. Christo is a former Bulgarian radio journalist, and he is now Bellingcat's executive director and lead investigator on Russia. And some of you might seen the report on 60 Minutes just over a week ago about Christo and Bellingcat. Really has an extraordinary body of work. He's revealed who was behind the poisonings of Russian dissidents, such as Alexei Navalny. He and his colleagues also uncovered evidence of Russian involvement in the downing of the Malaysian Airlines Flight 17 over Ukrainian airspace. And of course, now he and his colleagues are debunking Russian disinformation in the war on Ukraine. Bellingcat's tactics can be unconventional by the standards of U.S. newsrooms, but they are completely transparent about how they get their stories, and the results are unparalleled. Uncovering the lies propagated by Putin and his cronies has never been more important, I think we all can agree, and we will be very proud to honor Christo and Bellingcat at this year's Tribute to Journalists on November 10th. So thank you, and let me turn the show back to Yamiche.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for breaking that all down. It's so important to remember sort of all of the names and faces behind the incredible journalism that is out there. For almost 25 years, ICFJ has awarded the Knight International Journalism Awards to the best in our profession. These are journalists doing outstanding work that raises awareness about vital issues and improves people's lives, often at tremendous, tremendous risk to their own lives and to the journalists themselves. Previous winners include Maria Ressa. She's publisher of Rappler in the Philippines. Of course, she is the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. There's also Roman Anin, founder of iStories in Russia, who has continued to provide investigative reporting on President Putin's government from exile, and 3 journalists you'll meet tonight on the panel that I'll be moderating later. We're also pleased that this year's awards will be announced by longtime ICFJ's friend, Jose Zamora, Chief Communications and Impact Officer at Exile Content Studio. Jose's father, Jose Ruben Zamora, a brave Guatemalan publisher, won the award in 2003. So Jose knows firsthand what a difference winning this award can have and what a difference it makes to the journalists who win it. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jose.
Hello, everybody. Good night. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Yamiche. Unlike Yamiche, I am a hermit, so I would rather be alone, but I love seeing you. It is always very special for me to announce the winners of this award. I was honored to be a judge of the awards once again this year, along with the panel of distinguished journalists and entrepreneurs that you can see on the screen. I am glad that Gina, Pavla, Indira are here with us tonight. ICFJ and this award are extremely important, not only because they recognize the trajectory of exceptional journalists who have put their lives on the line to inform their communities, but also because they help journalists continue to do their job with a safety net by sending a message, a really important message to authorities that they are not alone, that they have international support, and that the world is watching. I also happen to know about the importance of this award personally. I come from a family of journalists. My father is the publisher of El Periódico in Guatemala. For over 30 years, our family has been persecuted and harassed with tactics that range from defamation campaigns to fiscal terrorism, and from baseless lawsuits to death threats. In 2002, as an example, my father and our entire family were viciously attacked at our home. The attackers were trying to intimidate us into stopping the paper's investigative reporting. But my father never gave in. And to this day, El Periódico is fearless when it comes to reporting the news honestly and fairly. Just this month, Guatemala's current administration is trying to persecute him for the paper's latest governmental corruption investigations. By giving my father the Knight International Journalism Award, ICFJ recognized his dedication to bringing the news to the Guatemalan people, despite the risks involved. This award has always meant so much to him. It validated all the sacrifices he made in the name of quality journalism. For this reason, I am honored to be here this evening to announce this year's winners. This year, when journalism and democracy are under threat in so many places, ICFJ presents this award to 3 international journalist awardees. And this will happen in November at the tribute dinner. This award will go to Anisha Shaheed of Afghanistan. Until the Taliban takeover of Kabul in August forced her into exile, Anisha was a correspondent for Tolo News and one of the bravest and most influential reporters in the country. Anisha covered the war between Afghan forces and the Taliban from the battlefield, revealing human rights abuses and atrocities by both sides. Her investigative reporting revealed deadly corruption and mismanagement in Afghanistan's COVID-19 response, resulting in the termination of everyone from the health minister to the heads of local hospitals. At a time when women journalists, all women, are being persecuted by the Taliban in Afghanistan, Anisha is a symbol of the incredible price the country has paid since the fall of Kabul, and the need to keep our focus on the tragedy there, even as other events draw our attention elsewhere. Our second award will go to 3 brave Ukrainian working journalists working for the Associated Press. Videographer Mistif Chernov, photographer Jenny Letkava, and producer Balisa Stejenko. And their names are much better than I pronounce them. Even if you don't know their names, I'm almost certainly sure you know their work. These were the only 3 journalists working for international media left in the Ukrainian city of Mariupol, as it was under relentless siege by Russian forces in mid-March. The images gave shocking witness to the brutality of a war many thought never could happen. They themselves were being hunted by Russian soldiers, outraged that their atrocities were being shown to the world, but they continued working. And their images galvanized world opinion against Russia, especially the photo of a woman on the verge of giving birth, being evacuated from a maternity hospital. As you almost certainly know, she and her baby both died. Since leaving Mariupol, they have continued to report on the atrocities there through the stories of the refugees who escaped. They have also reported from Kharkiv and Donbass declining offers to get them out of Ukraine. 2 of the 3 Ukrainians are freelancers, and all of them show the important role that local journalists play in bringing us the news from the world's hotspots. Finally, I am very pleased to announce that the ICFJ Trailblazer Award goes to my longtime friend, Carlos Dada of El Salvador. Carlos is a true pioneer in digital journalism. He launched Central America's first news website, El Faro, in 1998. Carlos saw how this new thing called the internet could be a platform for providing independent reporting in a country where traditional media have long been co-opted by political and business interests. In almost 25 years since its founding, El Faro, under Carlos' leadership, has fearlessly covered human rights violations, corruption, inequality, and the aftermath of the country's deadly civil war. Besides being a visionary entrepreneur, Carlos is a brilliant investigative reporter, and writer of incisive commentary. He has done so at great risk. Just this year, Canada's Citizen Lab revealed that the phones of Carlos and more than 20 of his colleagues were repeatedly hacked by the Pegasus spyware. A Citizen Lab researcher called this hack jaw-dropping, aggressively and persistent targeting. The attacks on Carlos and the staff of El Faro remind us of how far governments will go to keep journalists from reporting the truth. But these attacks have not silenced Carlos and El Faro. These 5 exceptional individuals are fearless journalists who have refused to let war, death threats, and government persecution stop them from producing brilliant stories, written and visual, that have impacted the lives of people in their countries. We congratulate them all for winning the ICFJ Knight International Journalism Award, and we hope you will join us to honor them in November in DC. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jose, for really breaking down and talking about all of the work of these journalists. I know I wasn't the only one who was just struck by all of those images that we just saw. It just is a visual reminder of the work that we're talking about tonight. So, of course, these journalists are truly inspiring, and I am looking forward to meeting them in Washington, November 10th. We'll say the date a couple more times so you get it. I hope you've gotten a sense of the incredibly important work that ICFJ does. If you would like to support independent Ukrainian and Russian journalists, if you would like to support and promote investigative reporting that holds Latin American governments to account, and if you'd like to combat the spread of deadly disinformation and misinformation, you can donate to ICFJ tonight. You can text ICFJ to 243725. It's right up there on your mobile, or raise your hand and a staffer will help you. If you want to not text, we can just raise your hand. Now let's enjoy dinner. We'll be back soon with our panel discussion on the threats to democracy around the world, including, again, here in the United States. So have fun and enjoy dinner. I hope you enjoyed the delicious dinner as much as I did. So much better, of course, again, than eating leftovers in front of your Zoom camera. My leftovers have never tasted that good. So I'm pleased to introduce the panel for tonight's discussion titled Democracy Under Attack, What the U.S. Can Learn from the World. These 4 people have given us vital coverage of the rising authoritarianism in 4 countries that were once beacons of hope for how dictatorships and theocracies could be replaced by freely elected governments that respect human rights. And as someone who's covered the recent attacks on democracy in our own country, I can tell you that we need to hear from the lessons that these journalists and analysts are going to share with us tonight. Let me introduce them. Pavla Holkova is the founder of the Czech Center for Investigative Journalism in Prague. Last year, she won ICFJ's Knight International Journalism Award for her work exposing corruption in multiple governments of Eastern Europe. We had a dinner conversation where she basically raised her hand to taking down at least 3 governments. We'll break that down of whether or not that's true or not. But you've done exceptional work, so I know some of that is true. Her reporting brought down several of those governments. Most poignantly, she carried out the investigation that was begun by a Slovak journalist, Jan Kuciak, who was brutally murdered with his fiancée before he could see the results of his work. Next up is Natalia Liao. She is the CEO of Agência Lupa, Brazil's first and foremost prominent fact-checking organization. She's the other winner of last year's, I should say, ICFJ's Knight International Journalism Awards. She won the award for her work relentlessly debunking deadly disinformation and misinformation about the pandemic in Brazil, which trails only the United States in COVID deaths. Much of the misinformation and disinformation came from President Bolsonaro and his cronies. I remember when they came to the White House. That was very, very interesting. And Natalia and her team are providing vital fact-checking ahead of this year's presidential election. So thank you so much, Natalia, for being here. We also have Sami Mahdi. He is a program director at ICFJ and the former bureau chief of Radio Azadi in Afghanistan. Sami won ICFJ's Knight International Journalism Award in 2012 when he was director of news and current affairs at One TV. At that station, he pioneered programs never before seen in his country, such as town halls with political leaders and a show in which women talked for the first time about suffering horrific abuse, wearing masks to protect their identities. Sammy faced regular death threats for his work, and in August, he escaped Kabul just one day before the Taliban took control. So very happy that you made it out.
Thank you.
And Peter, I'm going to really try to say your last name, but if I say it wrong, you'll forgive me. Peter Polsiversiv?
Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you. I tried that all day. Is a senior fellow at Johns Hopkins University and an expert on Russia and Ukraine. He was born in Ukraine when it was a Soviet republic. He later worked on as a documentary producer and presenter at BBC Radio 4 and at a Russian light entertainment channels. He has written 2 books about Russian disinformation and misinformation, including This Is Not Propaganda in 2019. He is the editor-at-large of Coda Story, an ICFJ partner that has won multiple awards for its in-depth coverage of issues such as disinformation across Eurasia, LGBTQ rights in Russia, and the migrant crisis in Europe. Thank you, all of you, for being here. I was reading your bios, just getting ready for this, and I was like, wow, this is going to be incredible. These are incredible people. So, Peter, I want to start with you first, maybe because I tried to say your last name and it didn't come out right, but also because, of course, the country that we're all talking about on a serious note is Russia, right? It is this war that we're seeing go on and on and on TVs and across our screens. Peter, the Yale professor, Timothy Snyder, argued in a New York Times piece last week that we should go ahead and say it. Russia has become a fascist country. What do you make of that reporting?
I mean, Tim is a friend of mine, so I can't say anything really. But I think he's right in a very deep way in terms of sort of the sort of psychological propaganda model that Putin and his propaganda lackeys are attempting. It is very much inspired by ideas we saw pioneered by the Nazis, in the sense that the idea is to create a sense of unity around the state. You're meant to identify yourself fully with the leader in the state. The leader expresses all the taboo desires that you have. It's a way of sort of validating aggression, sadism, sort of compensation for humiliation. And just as Goebbels and his acolytes try to create the idea of a Volkskommune that you're meant to lose yourself in an idea of the crowd, so Kremlin propaganda try something very, very similar with a huge amount of intentionality and a huge amount of historical knowledge. And it's very interesting looking at their polling that they do internally in Russia. And it's all about emotions and psychological belonging. It's not about ideas or facts. It's about the extent to which people identify themselves with the masses and the leader. So in that sense, that's right out of the Goebbels playbook. So I think that would be an accurate description.
I'm going to pause and not think about what I would say about the U.S. because when you talk about identity, it made me think completely of our democracy. I want to ask you one more question about Russia, which is we've seen, at least it seems, that President Putin has had these objectives that he's been able to achieve. I wonder where you see this going and what you think about what countries he might possibly attack when you think about places like Switzerland and Finland now knocking on NATO's door, something that a lot of people didn't think would happen. What do you think about where this is going?
Well, the most vulnerable countries are obviously the ones outside of sort of, the NATO framework. So Georgia, Moldova are the ones that we're all very worried about. But yeah, I mean, those would be my immediate worries.
Mm-hmm. I want to now ask you some questions about the Czech Republic. Given the history of Czechoslovakia as a Soviet satellite, what is the sentiment there about Putin and this war as it's playing out? And do you think in some ways it could turn the region against and away from populism?
We are freaking out. I mean, as both nations, we are just freaking out because it's too close. And I'm living in a city of Prague, and we usually have like 1.2 million inhabitants, and now we have 350,000 refugees from Ukraine in the city. And, you know, you can see a lot of solidarity, and it brings hope. Like, we are not such a rotten or corrupt nation because we help those people. We see them. And we were known in a part of a EU, European Union, that, you know, we don't want any refugees, you know, it's not our deal. And I was afraid that, you know, the nation is becoming quite racist. But now I see, like, okay, if we understand the nation, if we understand people from Ukraine, we can help them, and we accept them. And, you know, majority of my friends, they have a family from Ukraine at their home. It's not really only the state who is expressing solidarity, it's all the people. And to be perfectly honest, I think we are doing it because we are just afraid it will come to our countries as well, the conflict.
It's incredibly poignant when you say 350,000 people in a city with 1.2 million people. I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but I want to do sort of a round robin since each of you come from these countries that have so much to give us. Sammy, you were to talk about Afghanistan. You made it out of Kabul. You were able to come here. What does it mean for journalists and for Afghanistan, what we're seeing play out? I mean, I just was looking at images of the anchor, the male anchors are wearing masks. The women anchors are covering and showing only their eyes to try to really call attention, and also to follow the rules now of this draconian government. Where do you see all this?
It's a disaster for us. It's like you're living your nightmare. We remember, my generation remembers, excuse me, the invasion of the country by the Soviet Union, the Russians in 1980s, and then the role of communists in the country, and then the civil war and the role of Taliban in 1990s. When the Taliban came to power in 1990s, they, destroyed any kind of visual arts, including TV, watching videos, listening to music. Everything was forbidden and punishable. So since 2001 and the international intervention in Afghanistan, a very vibrant and lively ecosystem for media and freedom of expression, took place in the country. And I was from the first generation of the new journalists and independent journalists in the country. So within 5 years after the collapse of first Taliban in 2001, we had freedom of expression, women's rights, girls were going to school, we had female anchors on our entertainment and news and current affairs. And then within 10 years, we had over 100 TV channels across the country. We had the freest media ecosystem in the region. None of our neighboring countries had the level of freedom of expression that we were experiencing. Of course, it wasn't without the cost. We have paid a very, very high cost. Over 100 journalists and reporters, media workers have been deliberately killed by the Taliban and other terrorist groups over the past 2 decades, including many of my close colleagues and friends. And one day, we lost 9 journalists in 2018. And another day in 2016, January 2016, we lost 7 colleagues, and 20 other were wounded critically. And the Taliban took responsibility for the attack. And they were very proud for what they did. So I'm sorry for making the mood very sad here, but that's the reality of my life. That's the reality of my people's life. And we cannot keep silent about that.
And what are you doing now for people that are there now that are experiencing this?
Yeah, so asking or ordering female journalists to cover their faces, or I can say concealing their identities. They were being a woman, the very, very being a female, is censored by the Taliban. They don't like the faces of women. They are afraid of women, women voices, women faces, women ideas. That's why they are censoring everything. And that's because they are afraid of women. After collapse of Kabul, collapse of our government, men either fled the country or kept silence. But it was women who took to the streets of Kabul and stood against the Taliban. So this is the new generation of Afghan women who had an opportunity to educate themselves in the past 2 decades. That's why Taliban are afraid of education, and I'm not exaggerating it. So this is the newest order by the Taliban. My colleagues at different media outlets in Afghanistan, especially at Tolo News, where I used to work for several years, in solidarity to their female colleagues, they decided that they will cover their faces while reading the news on TV, unless Taliban stops forcing women to conceal their identity.
Very, very powerful. Natalia, of course, there is Brazil, and you're the biggest democracy in Latin America. Your president, in many ways, was a kindred spirit to former President Trump. And I saw it in real life in the Rose Garden. They were having a good time standing next to each other. From downplaying the severity of the pandemic to demonizing journalists, President Bolsonaro has really made all sorts of headlines and been, of course, the target of journalists who are trying to report the truth. What would you say about the state of democracy in Brazil and the state of journalism in Brazil?
It's very hard to be here and listening to the stories because it seems we are one step back in Brazil, but it's scary. Listen to this and maybe think about how could it be in Brazil, how the things could it be in Brazil if we didn't do what we want to do in terms of journalism and tackling misinformation. The journalistic environment in Brazil is in crisis, I would say, because of it, because Bolsonaro and his supporters are succeeded in, kill the credibility and the trust in news. So we are trying to fight against it, diversifying our coverage and stories and trying to collaborate with other journalistic initiatives and also work in which we believe is the long-term solution, which is the media literacy, which works in education and increasing the critical thinking in public schools and private schools and bringing kids and teenagers, to discuss the journalism role in a society like we have now in Brazil. Of course, we want to stand up for democracy, and we need to continue doing it with journalism, which is the short-term solution, but we need to think ahead, and we are trying to do it with education and supporting our kids and our teenagers on it.
Yeah. Pavla, I want to ask you about the brutal murder of your colleague and his fiance. You were, of course, devastated by that, but you also continued his work. And in a recent documentary, The Killing of a Journalist, you discussed it. And I wonder, what did it feel like to you to see the outrage after his murder, but also to carry on that work and to have the strength to go on?
When it happened, we as investigative journalists, we are not sure anyone is actually reading our stories because they were complicated and boring. And And after it happened and people went to the streets to protest and to demand proper independent investigation of the murder, we just understood that they do read the stories and they do understand it and they don't find it boring. And without those people in the streets, we would probably give up. And the second point of motivation was actually that we understood that Jano and Martina, they were killed to silence journalists. And if we would let it be, then we would fail. Maybe not as a journalist, but definitely as a friend. That's how we understood that we need to send a strong message that you can kill a journalist, but you can't kill the story. And that's really why we created probably the best team in Central Europe of investigative journalists across all the media who agreed to cooperate and share the information. And within the team, we exposed like the blueprint of corruption in Central Europe, how it works, how it was done, how it was possible that such a murder could happen. And now, like, the government is down, the prime minister is charged, 20 judges are being charged as we are sitting here. And the top management of the police was proclaimed the strongest organized criminal group in Slovakia. So I think it's good revenge.
Yeah. It is certainly good revenge. And I will ask you, how are you staying safe? How are you sort of continuing to do the work, given that obviously you're seeing real results, but you're also a human being and want to be safe?
I'm not living in Slovakia. I'm living in Czech Republic, and I was always living in Czech Republic, and just, it just happened to me that I started to cover Slovakia because we've been really close friends with Jano, and I got really upset that someone killed him.
Yeah. I mean, with that in mind, I wonder, Peter, I'll come back to you and think about what we're seeing play out. Because right, it's like we're like all kind of like, wow, that is a lot. Peter, I want to come back and maybe just, I was going to ask you about Russia, but I wonder if you would just, when you hear what we've been talking about, the sort of seriousness of this work, what you think when you think about what's going on in the United States and what we're seeing sort of with the conversations that we're having around journalism and around the need to hold democracies accountable?
I don't know, like when I lived in Moscow, I used to go to Novaya Gazeta a lot, which is the newspaper that won the Nobel Prize, and they had like a roster of photographs as you walked in, framed in black, which is all the journalists who were being killed, and they'd be like a new one every year. I don't know, when you live in Russia and other countries which are increasingly undemocratic, and Russia was only increasingly undemocratic at the time, you really understand why journalism is so vital. And I'm always stunned by some of the debates here. It's like, what's the relationship between democracy and journalism? Should journalists really be for democracy, or are they just objective? I'm like, no, like canaries in the coal mine. Like that's what you all are. What one does, if one comes from that environment, one does find some of the debates here a little bit flippant. But a lot of people ask me what's the sort of parallels that I see between Russia and the US. And obviously, look, they're very, very different. But something that did happen in Russia at the start of the 2000s, when Putin was only just starting to take over the media, when there was still a good deal of freedom of speech, there was a moment that I feel was missed, which was when a certain amount of what one might call liberal, urban media didn't maybe make enough of a really intentional effort to talk to the rest of the country. And the early Putin propaganda just really played on polarization. It said, here's the liberal cosmopolitan elites in the cities. They don't understand the real people. I understand the real people. So he played the usual populist trick of pitching the educated classes against the people. And I still wonder whether there was a moment there that could have been penetrated. Much more recently, when somebody like Alexei Navalny tried to penetrate that was probably the reason that they try to put Novichok in his underpants and kill him. That was the thing he wasn't allowed to do. As long as he sat in Moscow, fine. The minute he started building an all-national network, that's when they said, no, you're not allowed to do that. So I do sometimes wonder here when how can some of these really impressive media that are based in the avenues around here start to engage the audiences that are maybe starting to be swept away under the influence of other media and other influences. How do we penetrate conspiracy theory bubbles? How do we reach out to audiences that have lost trust in media? I think that's something that has to be done with quite a lot of sort of purpose. And it's not easy, but I just wonder whose job it is in America. In Britain, the BBC recognizes that is its job. Like, we have to reach those audiences that we lost, so they're opening offices across Britain to make sure that they're integrated. When I'm in America, I don't understand whose job is it to get up in the morning and create a genuine public sphere.
Yeah.
Well said.
Very well said.
Thank you.
Well, part of sort of what Peter's talking about, I want to go to you, Natalia, because you're fact-checking in Brazil, but when you think about whose job is it to try to connect us, a lot of that is fact-checkers. At least that's what we thought in America. It was like, okay, let's all fact-check what people are saying, and maybe that will do something. And obviously saying the 2020 election wasn't rigged doesn't just reach people. There was a great article in the New York Times just today that was showing all the different legislators and people who are now getting elected and taking steps to really try to essentially rig the next election, possibly. So as a fact checker, both in Brazil, but also here, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how your job in Brazil is going, but also, can we learn anything from what you're doing in Brazil? And do you have any of the answers, the solutions of how to impact any of this?
This is a little overwhelming. I think, as I said before, we don't have a short-term solution. Journalism and fact-checking, of course, are tools for improve the trust in news and the trust in truth, I think, to some kind of rebuild this credibility environment that we need to support the news, to support journalism. But I don't have this answer, We are trying to find how to tackle not just misinformation, but also conspiracy theories and all this distorted narratives that we have, not just in Brazil, but also here and in other countries, and it's a challenge. But as I said before, I personally think that the key is education, and this is the reason why we don't work just with journalism, and we need to work with a broader audience. And I don't know, maybe in some years we will look back and understand what is happening right now, but I don't think we will have this answer in, just 1 or 2 years. And it's kind of frustrating saying it, but I don't know. I think it's this. It's not just optimist. I'm not optimist with it, but I try to do my work, creating a safe environment for journalists to doing their work, for my journalists doing their work. So it's this, it's about mental health also.
Yeah, well, that's critical. Sammy, I want to come to you and ask you a question about the rise of populism and nationalism around the country, around the world, rather. India, Philippines, Turkey. When you take a look at sort of globally what we're seeing happening, what do you think is driving some of that, and what is the role of journalism there?
I think it's making our job very difficult day by day, because differentiating between facts, figures, and the reality versus, fake news or alternative facts, it has become very difficult now, especially in the areas where access to information is a major challenge, like Afghanistan or Russia or other places, when you do not have direct and free access to data and information, then it's very hard to fact check. And I think populist leaders and politicians are abusing that gap. It happened in Afghanistan as well, unfortunately. During the last 7 years, especially during the President Ashraf Ghani's tenure, he used this popular approach against media, against freedom of expression, even before the Taliban, unfortunately. He rarely gave any press conferences. He was not ready to give any interviews to local and domestic media. I interviewed him only once, and that was for his campaign. And that was the last night of elections campaign. Otherwise, he wouldn't be interested to give interviews to journalists and independent media. So, and he would, as my colleague Peter here said about early days of Putin in Russia, using the majority, the vast majority of population against elite, urban-based elite. I think Ashraf Ghani was trying to do something similar, unfortunately. And the entire government was using that kind of, earlier in our table there, some of colleagues were talking about a comparison between the world affairs of today's and 1930s when it comes to, populism and abusing that kind of sentiment. I see a lot of similarities. I see a lot of similarities, unfortunately, even in Afghanistan.
Yeah. And we're going to go to audience questions in about 30 seconds, so get your
14.
questions ready. I want to, Pavla, give you the last word because you said something that really stuck with me, which is that you took down this work, you took down these governments, you did this amazing work because you were mad about your friend. And I know I always tell people, like, I'm an emotional journalist. If I cry about something, it's probably going to end up on the front page of the New York Times if I can pitch it right? If I cry about something, I might end up in the A block of a TV show because I use my emotions as a sort of superpower. I wonder what lessons you take away from you being able to use your emotions as a journalistic superpower.
I don't know. I never thought of it, really, about using emotions, because if you are an investigative reporter, you need to clear the story out of any emotions. You need to write it very dry. And of course, when Jana was murdered, I, of course, wanted to lock myself in a bathroom and cry, but there was no time to do it. So we just needed to publish all the stories that we were able to finish and publish as soon as possible, especially to decrease the risk that someone else is going to be killed. And we did. And then it went on for another 2 or 3 years. And then, I'm just exhausted, totally, sitting here. But at the same time, I really believe that we were able to send a strong message to the world. Like, you are dealing with one journalist who is really making you angry or destroying your business. But if you will do any harm to him or her, you will need to face 20 angry journalists, and that's much worse.
Yeah. We're now going to take audience questions, so just raise your hand, it sounds like, and we'll pass the mic around. You're all journalism lovers, so you can't be this shy. Come on.
Thank you. Michael Golden. Peter, a question for you on a slightly different subject. In the U.S., we're reading a lot about the sanctions applied against Russia and the devastating effect it's having or will have on the economy. And there's been some recent reporting that says that, in fact, for the average person in Russia, they don't really notice the sanctions at this point. From your context, what do you know of the situation on the ground in Russia, in the experience of the average Russian?
That's a really good question. Firstly, we're really suffering from a dearth of understanding what's going on in Russia. Sort of, a lot of the good journalists have been either arrested or have left. It's hard to trust a lot of the economic statistics. So I know a bunch of people at Harvard who are really trying to collect all the data that we have to really try to read that. But it's going to be a slow burn. A lot of people talk about sort of late summer, early autumn is when there's going to be a real crisis just in sort of like in parts for cars. The stuff that people start to really notice. Not Apple Pay, which is symbolic, but actually the stuff that really gets to people. Also, I think it'll be very important to understand which bits of the Russian economy have almost this kind of like cultural worth. There's some things people don't care about, and Russians are actually very good at surviving historically. But there are some things which have this sort of real value because they represent your identity in some way. That might well be to do with automobiles. We'd have to think about what else. So there's this cultural aspect to economics we need to think about. But most of all, what really confuses me is democracies have launched sanctions and it's economic warfare against Russia without an information campaign to back it up with, which I just find bizarre. Imagine you rolled out a new economic plan without the information bit attached. I mean, just communication and advocacy and journalism that reports on this, just the whole thing. And we think it'll just magically rain down on people. We've given Putin complete free rein to reinterpret the sanctions, and sanctions are about perception. I mean, there will be some hard bits, but Russians aren't going to starve. So it's all about perception and messaging and understanding what this means to your identity and your place in the world. So I'm a little bit confused about why you would ever have an economic policy without an information piece attached, and how on earth we think they're going to be effective without that. So I'm a bit confused. I hope this slack gets taken up. We know that Arnold Schwarzenegger is very popular in Russia. He made a video addressing the Russian people, which got 15 million views on Telegram, which is a lot. Definitely someone who can burst out of the liberal bubble. So maybe Arnie needs to go and start explaining what these sanctions are all about and talking to the Russian people about it. But the idea that you would leave out the information piece, and journalism is one element of that, of many other things, I just find that really weird. I hope we have a plan. I mean, I'm in DC, I keep on trying to get a meeting with the Treasury. It's like, is there a plan for these sanctions? And I'm yet to receive an answer. I'm told they're really clever, though, like really clever.
Mm-hmm. That's a good question.
Yeah, Mish, this is for you. I must say I enjoy watching you on Morning Joe every day or whenever you're on. We are hearing from people who represent countries where there is a dearth of news. We have an explosion of quote news and news. How do you see getting the true facts out to people who don't want to hear them? Sorry, I'm a little stuck here. Who don't want to hear them and perhaps can't hear them because they hear so much more traffic. Any good ideas?
I love that you asked me a question because I was like, oh, I'm not the one answering all the hard questions tonight. I think that it's a tough one because what we have in this country, and I remember doing a Fulbright fellowship in Germany, and them asking, why do you have Fox News? Like the Germans were just like, but I don't understand. Like, why did Fox News even exist? Because it's so propaganda. It's not that it's sort of political opinion. It's turned into like, this is just sort of false information. I think that's hard because we are existing in this media ecosystem where if I come to you wherever you are, even if I'm someone who's trying to seek your opinion, you already sort of have this other 24-hour thing playing in the back of your mind about what this country is, what it means to be American, who needs to be an American, who deserves to be an American. And that, I think, is a really hard thing to get around. I think that the answer is always more journalism. I got that from Dean Baquet when I was at the New York Times. Dean always said, if you have a question, it's more journalism, and I take that. with me now. So I think we have to just continue to be out in those areas. We have to continue to be proving to people and meeting them where they are that we have this information. I will say the first time a lot of my family members, younger family members, found out I was a journalist, even though I'd been working at the New York Times and felt like I was in this great job. I took over Snapchat for one day, and they were like, "Are you a journalist?" They were like 16, my 16-year-old cousins. And it for me, it reminded me that you have to meet people where they are. And that means that we can't just assume people are going to find our product, but we have to go and figure out where are people meeting. Are they at the Starbucks? Are they at the Haitian grocery store? Where are they, and how are we going to make sure that we get to them and that we put our product there? That to me is my mind. Of course, I'm a journalist, not a distributor, but that to me is the answer to all of this. Has to be, at least part of it is meeting people where they are. Next question.
Yeah, hi, I'm Krista Tagila from ICFJ. I just want to check your opinions regarding anti-misinformation laws, bills, regulations. You represent different countries, and you all struggle with that issue. So I'd love to hear your situation. How is it being handled in your country? Do you have bills and laws being discussed, and if you believe that's the solution?
Either anybody have laws in their country?
We've got a law.
We don't have laws now. No laws.
And we have no disinformation, so why would we need one? Everything is true. We have a law. We pioneered the most constructive approach that all the rest of the world has followed, sort of. We'd like to think that. So in Britain, we decided not to do it around disinformation as a concept. We decided to do it around the idea of harms. So around online harm specifically, because we already have regulation for broadcast, so we went for the online space. And there's been a huge fight about how you define harms. I mean, there's harms as in the risk to someone's life. That's an easy one. Public health, so if it's the information or disinformation, whatever you want to call it, because disinformation isn't really a legal term. If this content or the design of an internet platform is causing public health issues, then you can lean on the platforms to do something about it. When it gets to political speech, there was a bit of a fight over that. And even though I think we still have like harms to democracy as an idea floating around, no one can define it. The human rights groups are like, "Oh my God, you sound fascist," and it's just become this very, very moot thing. So it's very hard to define. Disinformation isn't really a legal category. Once you actually dig into a lot of the stuff we call disinformation, it's not disinformation. I mean, most of the stuff the Russians did here in 2016 was just like, Trump, beautiful, Hillary, ugly. I mean, you could say that's disinformation, but it's not like, it's really about emotion and polarizing feelings. It's not disinformation as content. So, I don't know, as soon as you get into a room of lawyers and policymakers, they really push away from the concept as something that you can nail. So yeah, we're doing it around harms, which causes its own problems, but that's the approach we've chosen.
And we have time for one more question, I'm told. Oh, go ahead.
Is this
and you already had the bike.
Yes. This is for Peter. I was struck by what you said about the importance of information, given the situation that we are in with Russia and now Ukraine. How do you compare that with Russia in Afghanistan and the issue of why Russia withdrew from Afghanistan? Was it a matter of communication? Was it Russian soldiers coming back dead and complaining? Was there an effort to control information in Russia during that war? And how does it compare?
So I have to be honest, at the time of the peak of the Russian war in Afghanistan, I was, sort of playing cricket for the under-11s at my English school. So do you have something? I don't have any deep insights beyond the Alexievich books and the Roderick Braithwaite book. So all my knowledge is very secondary. I don't really feel as if I'm in a position to answer that.
I got into the school after Russians left Afghanistan, so I'm much younger than you.
It was a long war. It's a really long war. It went on and on and on. It depends where you take the line. I was talking about the retreat.
but I think because of the design of the communist regime, misinformation or disinformation was at the core of it. At least that's what we experienced in Afghanistan. The communist regime in Afghanistan, they didn't allow any kind of independent journalism, and there was only state propaganda. And I think Taliban are using the same tactics again now, I can say, to talk about today and current situation. Taliban are not tolerating any media outlet which is not becoming their mouthpiece. That's why we have lost over 45% of our media outlets in the country. Over 85% of female journalists have lost their jobs. Over 65% of journalists have lost their jobs. From over 10,000 media workers and journalists around the country, maybe around 1,000 have been evacuated to the United States, UK, Canada, and some European countries. The rest are still there, still trying to do their job, but Taliban are imposing a very, very harsh censorship on them.
I've just remembered I do have some primary research on this. So we were doing a lot of focus groups in Ukraine over the last 5-6 years, and we were asking people about Soviet nostalgia and their relationship with the Soviet Union. And even people who are nostalgic for bits of the Soviet Union, who would, if you looked at forms they fill in, polling, they'd say they're nostalgic. When we had focus groups with them, we would ask them about Chernobyl, about Afghanistan. Suddenly all this trauma would come out. And by trauma, I'm being very specific. All the stuff that had never come into public speech. All these family events, cousins had been lost there, family members. It had never been expressed in public speech. So our advice to Ukrainian media was like, start making programs about this. Start talking through this stuff if you want these people to trust you. They're in the east of the country. They're the ones who come up in the polling as pro-Soviet. They're the ones Putin thinks will support him when he invades, and now we know he was thinking about that. And that's exactly the polling the Russians were thinking about. And the advice we gave, public service media in Ukraine was like, start talking about the other stuff in the Soviet experience, yeah? And so personally, I'm taking full credit for Ukrainian unity in the face of Putin's invasion.
Well, on that note, well, thank you so much to all of you for answering my questions, for answering the audience questions. This has been a remarkable discussion about your countries and about the United States and about the world that we're all living through and the state of journalism. So thank you so much. And I'm very, very excited to now hand it back over to Sharon.
Thank you all. That was an amazing discussion. I think we all got a lot out of that. Pretty meaningful, pretty sobering at times, and a lot of food for thought. Yamiche, thank you. She's back there. Thank you so much for being our MC. She did a fabulous job. Hope you all got a lot out of this as well. And if you were impressed by what you heard, if it was thought-provoking, please donate to, this is where I'm supposed to do my, yeah, there we go. Please donate, text ICFJ to 243-725 or raise a hand and an ICFJ staffer will find you. We can't do this work supporting incredible journalists like this without your help. So we really, really do thank you for all your support. Reminder to save that date. Should I make you all shout out the date of our tribute? Come on, people. November. There you go. November 10th, 2022 in Washington, D.C. It'll be our tribute to journalists. The awardees that you saw we talked about tonight and announced tonight, you will get to meet in person in Washington. So we look forward to having you all there. And again, a big, big thanks to Matt Winkler and to Bloomberg for hosting us in this lovely space. Absolutely fantastic. A big thank you to all the members of ICFJ's board of directors who are here tonight. And a big thank you especially to our chairman, Matt Winkler. My God, Michael Golden. I just messed that up, didn't I? And And a big thank you to ICFJ staff for doing so much to help put this all together. Thank you, folks. And again, thank you all for being here, and hope you have a wonderful evening.